Right in the middle of my son's wedding, she leaned over and called me trash. And my son heard every word. I'm 58 male. Thick hands, gray at the temples, the kind of face that spent more time outdoors than in boardrooms. I started my construction contracting business at 31 with a used truck, 2 employees, and a credit line I could barely sleep at night thinking about. 27 years later, I employ 40 people, hold contracts across 3 counties, and own my home outright. I'm not wealthy by certain definitions, but I built everything I have from nothing, and I've never once apologized for how I got here. My son is 27. He's the thing I'm most proud of in my life, and I mean that without qualification. He works in financial analysis for a regional investment firm, sharp, focused, the kind of young man who listens more than he talks. He got those instincts from his mother, who passed when he was 19. I raised him the rest of the way alone. I want that context understood before anything else in this story. He met his wife at a work conference 2 years ago. She seemed fine, polished, confident, quick with a smile. I was glad he was happy. I didn't read too much into the early signals because I wanted to be the kind of father who gives people a fair chance. The first time I met her parents, her father looked at my truck in the driveway of their home, a 2021 work truck, clean, lettered with my company name, and said, "Oh, you drove that here." Not a question, just a statement with a very particular amount of air in it. Her mother hugged me the way people hug someone who has just touched something they're unsure about. That was 14 months ago. I filed it away and gave them more time. They didn't use the time wisely. The engagement happened last spring. My son called me first, which meant everything. We went to dinner, just the 2 of us, and he told me he was going to propose. He was nervous and excited and so genuinely himself that I had to work to keep my expression steady. I told him his mother would have loved her. I meant it as kindly as I knew how. The families met formally for the first time 6 weeks later at a dinner her parents hosted at their home. Large house in the kind of neighborhood where every mailbox matches. Her father runs a real estate development company. Mid-scale commercial and residential projects, the kind of operation that wears wealth more visibly than it earns it, if you know what to look for. Her mother is involved in charity work that seems to function primarily as a social network. Her brother is 30, works for his father, and has the handshake of a man who's never needed to convince anyone of anything, because the room always got arranged in his favor before he arrived. At that dinner, her father made a comment about the wedding venue they had in mind, a private estate that ran about $40,000 for the weekend. He mentioned the price while looking at me, then said, "Of course we'll be handling the majority of the costs. We want everything done properly." Done properly. I heard what lived inside those 2 words. I smiled and said it sounded like a beautiful venue. I started paying closer attention after that. Over the following months, the planning accelerated, and so did the pattern. My son and his fiancée were busy with work, which meant both sets of parents were heavily involved in logistics. Every time I offered to contribute, financially, practically, even just in terms of coordinating vendors, which I do professionally every single day, her mother would smile and say they had it covered. Her father would nod in that way that communicates your input is noted and will not be considered. They cut my side of the family out of the seating arrangement draft. I found out from my sister, who called me confused because she'd received a table assignment that placed her, my brother-in-law, and 3 of my cousins at a table near the catering entrance. When I raised it with my son, he looked genuinely surprised. He hadn't seen the draft. He brought it up with his fiancée. The table got moved, but not before her mother mentioned, to my son within earshot of me, that your father's family are quite a lot of people. There were 11 of us. Her side had 43. I said nothing. I kept track. The rehearsal dinner was the moment they'd been building toward. I understand that now. It was their venue, a private dining room in a downtown restaurant that seated 30. They'd arranged everything. The catering, the florals, the program. I was handed a schedule when I arrived like a guest who'd been assigned a slot. Dinner progressed. Toasts were made. Her uncle gave one. Her mother gave one. And then her father stood up with a glass and the particular confidence of a man who decided in advance that whatever he said would land well, because it always had. He talked about his daughter, about what she deserved, about the kind of life he'd worked to give her and intended to see continued. He talked about my son, warmly enough, in the way you talk about an acquisition that exceeded expectations. And then he looked down the table at me, glass still raised, and said, "We're grateful that David was raised with good values. That speaks to his upbringing. And we know that families contribute what they're able to, in whatever form that takes." Polite laughter. A few people raised their glasses without fully processing what they'd just been asked to toast. My son's jaw tightened. He caught my eye across the table. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. "Not here." Her brother was smiling into his drink. I sat with my hands flat on the table and let the moment pass over me like weather. But something shifted in me that night. Not anger. Something colder and more useful than anger. The absolute, settled certainty that these people had made a calculation about who I was and what I would tolerate, and that the calculation was wrong. I went home and I started making calls. The first was to my attorney, who I've worked with for over a decade on construction contracts and property matters. I told him the general shape of the situation: a wealthy family, a real estate development operation, a son about to marry into it, and I asked him what I should be paying attention to. He asked me one question: "Has anyone mentioned a property gift to the couple?" I said yes. Her father had announced at that same dinner that he intended to gift the young couple a property, a townhouse in a desirable part of the city. He'd made it sound generous and final. My son had seemed genuinely moved. My attorney said, "Find out how the title is structured before anyone signs anything." I asked him what he meant. "A gift is a gift when it transfers free and clear," he said. "A gift that goes into a family trust or that carries conditions isn't a gift. It's a leash." I sat with that for a long moment. "Get me whatever documentation you can," he said, "and don't tip them off." I didn't sleep well that night, but not because I was afraid, because I was thinking, property records are public documents. Most people don't know that or don't think about it because most people have no reason to spend time in county recorder databases. I do. 27 years of construction contracting means I've pulled property records, lien histories, and title documents more times than I can count. It's as routine to me as checking the weather before a pour. Within 48 hours of my conversation with my attorney, I had the address of the townhouse her father had announced as a gift. My attorney ran the title search while I cross-referenced the property's permit history, a habit, nothing more. You look at a building's permit record the way a doctor looks at a chart. It tells you things the surface doesn't. The title search came back first. The townhouse had been transferred 2 months earlier, before the engagement was even announced publicly, into a family revocable living trust. Her father and mother were listed as co-trustees. The named beneficiaries were their daughter and, listed secondarily, the trust itself. My son's name was nowhere in the document. I read that page 3 times. My attorney explained it plainly when I called him. A revocable living trust means the grantors, her parents, can modify or revoke the trust at any time while they're living. As co-trustees, they retain full administrative control over the asset. The property could be pulled back, restructured, or encumbered at any point without my son's knowledge or consent. And because the trust document named only their daughter as beneficiary, not the couple jointly, in most interpretations, my son would have no legal claim to the property even after years of marriage, unless it was explicitly retitled. "It's not a gift," my attorney said. "It's a residence with a landlord who doesn't charge rent yet." "What does yet mean?" I asked. "It means the terms can change whenever the trustees decide they should." I asked him how long it would take for my son to find this out on his own, without help. "Depends on whether anyone ever tells him to look," he said. I thought about my son, sitting across from me at that dinner, moved by a gesture that had been engineered to look like generosity. I thought about what it would mean 5 years from now if the marriage hit a rough patch and her parents decided to restructure the trust. My son, living in a home he believed was a gift, discovering overnight that the foundation under him belonged to someone else entirely. I called him that evening, not to unload everything, not yet. Just to ask one question. "Did they give you any documentation on the townhouse? Deed? Title transfer? Anything in writing?" Pause. They said they'd handle all of that after the wedding. Why? Just want to make sure you're protected, I said. Don't sign anything without running it by an attorney first. Your own attorney, not theirs. Another pause. Dad, what do you know? Let me finish putting it together first, I said. Then we talk. While my attorney was handling the property documentation, I went back to the permit history I'd pulled on that townhouse. Construction people notice things. It's not intentional. It's the same way a chef can't eat at a restaurant without evaluating the dish. I look at buildings and I see the decisions behind them. The townhouse had undergone a significant interior renovation approximately 3 years prior. New kitchen, bathroom remodel, HVAC replacement. Good scope of work. About $180,000 worth of project based on the permit valuations filed with the county. The general contractor of record was a company I didn't recognize. Small outfit, incorporated about 6 years ago. I ran the business registration. The registered agent was her brother. I sat back in my chair. Her brother's company had pulled the permits, executed a $180,000 renovation, and presumably billed her father's development company for the work. Whether the work was performed at market rate above it or was partially subcontracted to unlicensed labor while billing for licensed work, I didn't know yet. But I knew the structure. Father owns the asset. Son's company performs the work on the asset. Money moves within the family, presumably with favorable terms, and the permit record creates a paper trail of legitimacy. It's not automatically illegal, but it's the kind of arrangement that attracts scrutiny when someone decides to look. I made a call to a former subcontractor of mine who now worked as an inspector for the county building department. I didn't ask him to do anything improper. I asked him whether the final inspection records on that permit were publicly accessible and whether everything had been signed off correctly. He called me back the next day. Final inspection on the HVAC was signed off, he said, but the signature on the mechanical inspection is from an inspector who retired 8 months before that date. I wrote that down. So the signature is inconsistent with the record, he said carefully. That's all I can tell you officially. That was enough. The wedding was 6 weeks out when the entitlement escalated past condescension into something more direct. Her father called me. First time he'd ever initiated contact. His voice had the practiced warmth of someone who spent decades in rooms where he needed things from people he didn't respect. He said he wanted to discuss my contribution to the wedding. He said he understood that construction was a cyclical business and that cash flow could be unpredictable. He said the family wanted me to feel comfortable and that nobody expected me to overextend myself. He said all of this slowly, giving each word room to land. Then he said, we were thinking a card would be more than sufficient from your side. Perhaps something heartfelt. A card. He called me to suggest I give my son a card. I let the silence sit for 4 full seconds before I responded. I appreciate the call, I said. I'll handle my contribution in my own way. Of course, he said smoothly. Just didn't want you to feel any pressure. I don't, I said. He hung up satisfied. I could hear it in the click. 2 weeks later, my son called me, tense in the way he gets when he's trying to stay measured. His future father-in-law had apparently suggested to the couple that the wedding gift from my side, whatever it turned out to be directed toward household items rather than a financial contribution, because your father might be more comfortable with something tangible. My son had shut it down immediately, but the fact that it had been said that her father had tried to preemptively diminish and categorize whatever I might give directly to my son told me exactly how little distance remained between condescension and open disrespect. It also told me they'd been discussing me, specifically, in terms of what I could and couldn't do. I made 2 more calls that week. The first was to my accountant. I asked him to prepare documentation of my company's current valuation, asset holdings, and the past 3 years of contract revenue. Clean, formal, the kind of document you take to a bank for a significant loan. The second call was to a commercial real estate contact I'd worked with on 3 different county projects over the past decade. I asked him whether he knew anything about her father's development company, specifically about their current project pipeline and financing structure. What he told me took about 20 minutes and changed the shape of everything. Her father's development company was leveraged significantly Two of their active commercial projects had run over budget, and a third, a mixed-use residential development that was supposed to break ground 18 months ago, had stalled because their primary lender had tightened terms following a rate environment shift. They were currently seeking a refinancing partner for that stalled project. Without it, the timeline collapsed and penalties kicked in under the municipal development agreement they'd signed. The townhouse gift, my contact explained, was almost certainly collateral optics, a visible gesture of wealth made at a moment when the actual balance sheet was under pressure. The kind of thing families do when they need the people around them to believe the floor is solid. Who are they talking to for the refinancing? I asked. He gave me two names. Regional investment groups. Mid-market lenders. One of them was the firm my son worked for. I sat with that for a long moment and understood, completely, what had been assembled around my son without his knowledge. The relationship. The property gesture. The managed optics of a prosperous family. His future father-in-law needed access to capital channels, and my son, a financial analyst at a regional investment firm, was a warm introduction waiting to happen. My son was being positioned, not maliciously, perhaps, but deliberately. Dad, I said quietly to the empty room, pay attention. I drove to my son's apartment on a Wednesday evening with a folder under my arm and 2 coffees from the place he liked. We sat at his kitchen table. I put the folder down. I walked him through everything, the title search, the trust structure, the permit inconsistency, his father-in-law's financing situation, and the name of the lender his firm had recently been in contact with. My son didn't speak for a long time after I finished. Then he said he asked me 2 months ago if I could get him a meeting with our acquisitions team. I told him I'd see what I could do. Did you set up the meeting? Not yet. He looked at the folder. I almost did last week. I nodded. What do I do? He asked. First, I said, you get your own attorney and you get full title documentation on that townhouse in writing before the wedding. If it can't be retitled into both your names, free and clear, you need to know that now. And the meeting? That's your call, I said. But I'd think carefully about what it means to your professional standing to facilitate a deal for a family member, especially one whose financials you're now aware of. He closed the folder. Does she know any of this? That was the question I'd been sitting with for a week. I don't know, I said honestly. But you need to find out. My son talked to her that same night. He told me about it the next morning. He'd sat her down after dinner, laid out what I'd found, and asked her directly whether she knew about the trust structure on the townhouse and her father's financing situation. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she knew the property was in a trust. She hadn't known the terms. She said her father handled all of that and she'd never had reason to question it. My son asked her about the lender meeting, whether her father had mentioned it in connection to him specifically. Another long pause. Then, he said you were well connected and that it might be something you could help with down the line. I didn't think he meant, she stopped. I didn't think he was actively. She didn't finish the sentence. But the fact that she couldn't finish it told my son what he needed to know about what she'd suspected and chosen not to examine. They talked for 3 hours. I don't know everything that was said. What I know is that she called her father the following morning, and that call did not go well. Her father called me 40 minutes later. His voice was different this time. The practiced warmth was gone. What replaced it was the tone of a man who'd been operating on a particular set of assumptions for a long time and had just discovered someone had moved the furniture. I don't know what you think you've found, he said, but you're interfering in something you don't understand. I understand it clearly, I said. That's the problem you're having. The trust is standard estate planning. Any attorney will tell you that. My attorney told me exactly what it is, I said. He also told me what it isn't. Would you like to compare notes? Silence. You're going to damage your son's marriage before it starts, he said. Over paperwork. I'm protecting my son before his marriage starts, I said. Over paperwork that would have surfaced eventually under far worse circumstances. We have been nothing but generous. You announced a gift that wasn't structured as one, I said. In front of 30 people, to a young man who trusted the gesture at face value. That's not generosity. That's optics. The line was quiet for long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. Then, what is it you want exactly? Nothing from you, I said. What my son wants is full title to that property transferred into both their names, free and clear of the trust, within 30 days of the wedding. His attorney will draft the terms. Yours can review them. And if we don't find that agreeable, then my son makes a fully informed decision about how to proceed, I said. And I make a call to the county building department about an interesting inconsistency in the mechanical inspection record on that townhouse renovation. The silence this time was different, denser. That's a serious allegation, he said slowly. It's a question about a public record, I said. Whether it becomes an allegation depends entirely on the next 30 days. He hung up. Her father spent the following week attempting to reroute the pressure. First, he went to his daughter, telling her that I was threatening the family, that I was using her wedding as leverage, that my interference was evidence of the kind of man my son had unfortunately been raised by. She relayed this to my son. My son called me. I walked him through every document again, calmly, and let him draw his own conclusions. Then her father went to her mother, who called my son's fiancé and spent an hour on the phone describing what stress this was causing her father's health. My son's fiancé, to her genuine credit, told her mother that the solution to the stress was straightforward: retitle the property. Then her brother showed up at my son's workplace. Didn't go upstairs, just texted from the lobby asking to meet. My son met him outside. Her brother spent 20 minutes explaining that their father was a proud man, that this situation was embarrassing, and that surely there was a way to resolve it quietly without lawyers getting further involved. My son told him the lawyers were already involved and that further involvement was the point. Her brother then made the mistake of suggesting, carefully, with plausible deniability wrapped around every word, that my son's position at his firm could be complicated if the right people heard he'd been using confidential client information to investigate his future in-laws. My son recorded that conversation on his phone. He'd started recording conversations 4 days earlier at the suggestion of his own attorney. He texted me a transcript that evening with a single line underneath. What do I do with this? I forwarded it to my attorney. My attorney contacted their family attorney the following morning and made clear that the recording existed, that it documented what could be characterized as an attempt to threaten a financial professional's employment as leverage in a civil matter, and that our preferred resolution remained exactly what it had always been: clear title, clean transfer, 30 days. The family attorney called back within 6 hours. They were prepared to proceed with the retitling. The wedding happened on a Saturday in late October. The venue was beautiful, I'll give them that. Rolling grounds, white tents, the kind of late autumn light that makes everything look warmer than the temperature actually is. My sister cried during the ceremony. My son stood at that altar and looked at his bride the way his mother used to look at me in the early years, and I had to find a fixed point on the back wall and hold it for a moment. Whatever had been happening around this marriage, what was happening inside it was real. I believed that then, and I believe it now. Her father and I did not speak directly during the ceremony. At the reception, he approached me once, briefly, at the edge of the tent near the bar, with a glass of scotch and the expression of a man who has been brought to a table he didn't choose. You got what you wanted, he said. My son got what he was owed, I said. There's a difference. He looked at me for a moment. You're harder than you look. Most people who've built something from nothing are, I said. You'd know that if you'd ever done it. He walked away. He didn't approach me again for the rest of the evening. Her brother avoided me entirely. Her mother smiled with her lips whenever we were near each other. The table arrangement was exactly what my son and his bride had approved together, and my sister sat with my cousin 2 tables from the dance floor and told me later it was the best wedding she'd attended in 15 years. I danced once, with my daughter-in-law who pulled me out there during a slower song and apologized quietly, in 3 sentences, for what her family had put me through. I told her I didn't hold her responsible for other people's choices. I meant that completely. The title transfer completed 26 days after the wedding. My son and his wife received a notarized deed transferring the townhouse into both their names as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Full title. No trust. No conditions. My attorney reviewed it before they signed. The permit inconsistency on the renovation. The inspector's signature that predated the retirement by 8 months, I sat on. I'd used it as leverage and it had served its purpose. Reporting it after the fact would have accomplished nothing except additional damage to a family my son had married into. I'm not in the business of scorched earth. I'm in the business of corrected outcomes. Her father's refinancing situation, the stalled mixed-use development, the tightened lender terms, resolved itself without my son's involvement. He had disclosed the conflict of interest to his compliance team within a week of our kitchen table conversation. They noted it, thanked him, and ensured he had no involvement in any related deal evaluation. His professional standing was cleaner for it, not compromised. The development deal eventually found funding through a different channel. Her father didn't lose the project. He just didn't get to use my son to access it. For months after the wedding, my son and I had dinner. Just the two of us again. Same as the night he told me he was going to propose. Same restaurant, same corner table. He asked me at one point whether I'd known, going into all of it, how it would resolve. No, I said. I knew what was right. That's different from knowing how it ends. He nodded. She's still processing some of it. Her relationship with her father is, he paused. Complicated now. That's his consequence, I said. Not yours to carry. I know. He looked at his glass. I just keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't pulled those records. Don't, I said. You're in the right place. That's what matters. What I didn't say, what I thought about on the drive home, was that I'd pulled those records because his mother wasn't here to watch his back. That's the job now. That's what's left of the partnership we built together for 20 years before she was gone. I carry that forward the only way I know how. By paying attention, by staying methodical, and by refusing to let anyone convince me that my son is less than exactly what he is. Nobody in that family anticipated a man in a lettered work truck knowing how to read a title search. They saw the truck and made an assumption. They built an entire architecture of condescension on top of that assumption. The truck, for the record, is still in my driveway, still lettered, still carries everything I built. I wouldn't trade it for their entire zip code. If this story hit home, subscribe before your own in-laws start running title searches on your life. Some of us read the fine print, so our kids don't have to.